some of the.
Oh, adventure. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Woven Church. We're so glad you're here. Welcome, and we want to say out loud, no matter where you are from, no matter what race or ethnicity, no matter your socioeconomic background, whether you are queer or straight and cisgender, however you think about God, we are just happy that you are here today. And we have Matt Harling here today, who is actually the host. I don't know of any announcements.
I can't think of any off the top of my head. Oh, yes.
So in six days. At which market? What's the name of the market? Julietta Market. And you have what to? Nice. Crochet and origami things. Wonderful.
Very nice.
So if you can, go see that on Saturday. Great. So Matt is actually taking all of July.
Yep.
So
Braving July again. I think I did it last year too with
Yep.
the sort of media series. So doing that again this month.
the Logan is and Daniel both are taking time to do podcast, to really get the podcast, all of those parts of it up and running for this month. So without further ado, take it away.
All right. So when I first started coming here, one of the most interesting points of theology that was brought up to me is, what if hell isn't real? And I wanted to explore that a little bit further kind of in this series. So I know, like, one of my first conversations about that was with Derek. And, Derek, our former worship pastor, he kind of introduced me to a couple of different ideas of, what that may look like and stuff like that. And I think, generally get behind the idea of there not being a hell. Like, how do you feel as a pastor about the idea of hell?
Yeah, well, I mean, if there's no hell, then what am I doing? Because exactly, what the hell are we doing? Because, I mean, that's what church is about, is keeping people from going there. So, hell was actually the beginning of my deconstruction, because it is such a backwards, upside down, and I don't mean upside down in the good sense, upside down of Jesus idea. So where it really got to me was as a parent. So I have these two wonderful girls, and the question is, what if one of my girls, or both of them, decided they didn't want to receive my love? Like, I offered my love to them, and they said, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to do my own thing, and I really just don't even want you in my life. Could I, in my wildest imagination, want them to be punished eternally? No. I mean, there's no part in my mind, in my imagination, that could imagine that is what I would want.
Yeah.
And so the question is, am I really a more merciful parent than God? And it's such a ludicrous idea. And I had been wondering about hell for decades because I knew there was something off. But when you're in the middle of evangelicalism, tribe speak is so strong that you can't think outside of it. At least I couldn't. It was very hard for me. So I made up all kinds of stupid stuff to figure out how there could still be a hell. One was, well, heaven just must be so much better that, so if I reasoned maybe 1 in 10 people would go to heaven, from the earth. Because 90% of people don't do what we as evangelicals wanted them to do, which was to receive Jesus as their personal Savior, right? And so 90% of the world is all going to hell, and 10% of us are going to heaven. And I'm thinking, so how much better would heaven have to be compared to how bad hell is for this to work? It must be really, really good. And, that's one of those things of just like craziness, like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And,
like one thing that I always found crazy was like, well, why wouldn't a good father like punish his children for disobeying him? And I'm like, that's an insane way to think about that. No, it's like the father would explain like, hey, like this is not the way we act or the way we do things. Like also even just from not being an actual father, but being kind of in an adoptive father situation, like thinking about that logically doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and the big difference between the parent punishing a child and God sending people to hell is that hell is forever. And usually when you don't punish your child, you don't leave them in timeout forever. Though I think Michelle might have thought it was forever. And so in our best judicial systems, not necessarily the best, but one of the things they do in the judicial system is talk about proportionality. So you want the punishment to be proportional to the crime. Someone who steals $10 shouldn't get the same punishment as somebody who kills somebody else.
Right.
And so we say there should be a proportionality in punishment. And further, if depending on what culture the person grew up in, if they grew up in horrible circumstances, then we tend to not think the punishment should be as severe as somebody that should have known better. So those are two different parts of proportionality that judges would do in sentencing.
Right.
Well, in the evangelical system, there's no proportionality. Their system is, because if you sin in any way, in the smallest way, you deserve punishment forever.
Right.
What the fuck?
You're going to hell for that one.
Our judicial system is that much better than God's judicial system.
Right.
That we know that proportionality is something that should be involved, and God doesn't. Like, God never figured that out. Like, oh, maybe that's a good idea. And anyway, so I knew that hell as as I had understood it to be, which was eternal conscious torment in, I guess you could say, retribution. So, so there's the story of Jesus knocking at your heart, and like he knocks at your heart and says, "Can I come in?" And the person's supposed to say, "Yes, I'd love you to come into my heart." And so the saying is, the story goes, Jesus knocks on the door of your heart and says, "May I come in? I love you." And the person says, No, why would I want you to come in? Well, I'm here to save you. Well, what are you saving me from?
Yep.
I'm saving you from what I'm going to do to you if you don't let me in.
I've already poured gasoline around the outside of your heart. I've got a lit match. Let me in.
Let me in. And I say that in love.
Right.
And so, when you step back from it, it's the most nonsensical thing in the whole understanding. So there is another way that people have come at it, and that is that it's the idea of annihilationism. So in that system, what happens is everybody's resurrected at the end of the age, and God judges everybody, and if you are found guilty, then he sends you to your death. And by death, I mean death. So, like you cease to exist. Right. And that's called annihilationism. And the thinking evangelicals that I know mostly go with that instead of the eternal conscious punishment. Yeah. Because it sounds a lot gentler.
Right.
For me, it doesn't do it.
Yeah.
If I'm alive in heaven and my children just have ceased to exist, that doesn't do much for me.
Right. And then if we talk about God knitting somebody in the womb, and it's like, well, I guess I fucked up. Bye. Like that, once again, how does that create any sort of loving God who was supposedly there within your creation?
Yeah, that's right. And if it is true that all young children go to heaven and all fetuses, heaven is going to be full of fetuses. That's what we got there, because there are way more, fetuses that have died than there are people. So it's going to be an interesting place.
Yeah.
So that was annihilationism.
Gotcha. I think one of the things that Derek told me is his thought process was some people who have done terrible things spend the rest of their eternity deeply apologizing and meeting face to face with the people they've wronged in their life. So that means a Hitler is speaking to Jews the entirety of his afterlife existence, all the lives that he affected and killed and everything like that, which is kind of a different version of hell that I think I could kind of get behind of yeah, you did wrong things, you need to kind of do the time and understand the cause that you did.
Yeah, and that, and Derek would say this too, this comes out of Brad Jerzak's work. Yeah. And in this idea, you do have to make amends after death. And I think it's a little different than you said, in that you you make the amends, and that is the punishment.
Okay.
And then when you have made the amends, then you are cleansed and free.
Gotcha.
So for, at least for Jerzak, what that is the fire of hell is the cleansing fire of doing the work of amends and of forgiveness, of being forgiven, in that case by all the people you have wronged, though it could also be creation for all that you have done. And I think that does make sense, because almost all of us want there to be justice for people who have done wrong.
Yeah.
And what we don't want is a justice that is so out of proportion that it ceases to be love. My take on hell is a little bit different than that.
Okay.
Because I think that there is choice after hell. I mean, choice after death.
Okay.
For me, woven into the fabric of love is choice. That if I love you, you have a choice whether to love me back or not.
Right.
So what that would mean is, after someone dies, either God stops loving them, or else they still have choice. You can't have them both.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't believe that God would ever stop loving someone.
Yeah.
So that means they would always have choice.
Yeah.
And so they would have choice after death, to say, look, I screwed up and hurt people, and so now I'm ready to make amends and ask for forgiveness and be cleansed. And if they should choose not to want to do that, they get to do that. And for me, that is hell.
Yeah.
I don't think God ever forces people to love them. It ever forces people to be in community. And so that there has to be a place for people that would never choose God.
Yeah.
And if at some point later, billions of years from now, they say, this sucks, I would rather receive love than they get to.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Love is still in play.
Yeah. Yep. Awesome. So, yeah, I just wanted to kind of like lay the foundations of that. So, what I'm really focusing on in this series is kind of like the different things that are questions around hell. So, like today, we're going to discuss a little bit more specifically about sin, and some information, like kind of defining that if there isn't a hell. We've also got, we're going to be talking about the end for bad people. So we've already kind of touched a little bit on that, but I'll be talking with Logan about that. We're going to be talking about the enemy and spiritual warfare. That's going to be a fun one. And then we're going to round the whole series out kind of talking about what's the point of all of this. So just wanted to kind of lay the groundwork, but let's jump into sin. So how do we?
That's worthy of a TikTok. Let's jump into sin.
Let's jump into sin. Let's jump right on in.
What, remember that old hymn? It was when we were sinking deep in sin. Woohoo! It's not funny, really, but we did used to sing that in high school. So pretty juvenile. Sorry.
So how do we define sin if there isn't, maybe necessarily a punishment for it, or if there is, like, how do we define sin in our current age, do you think?
Yeah, I think sin is completely relative to the culture you're in and the situations you're in. If you go through the Ten Commandments, there aren't any of them that work through all cultures. So murder, it says don't murder. Well, if you kill somebody in war, is that murder? If you if you're defending your spouse and have to murder, Is that murder? Is that breaking the commandment? If you hate your brother, Jesus says that's murder. And so, what do you mean by hate? And you can go through all 10 commandments, and you'll find all of them are relative to the culture you're in.
Right.
So for me, sin is anything that is against love or not out of love.
Okay.
The kicker in that one is that it's love for yourself, love for others, love for creation, and love for God. So it's a pretty expansive definition, and in some ways, I think it makes sin a lot more present than the old definition, which is a real binary understanding. This is sin, this isn't sin. This is sin, this isn't sin. Well, almost everything I do has some sin element in it.
Right.
Hardly anything I do is out of pure love. Maybe nothing, I don't know. Well, so is it, if it's 51% not out of love, is it sin?
It's a slippery slope.
It's a slippery slope. That's exactly right. And so I think that the whole idea of sin comes out of this binary desire to to decide for other people what their sin is. And for some of us, it's to decide for ourselves what sin is. And so I don't think it makes sense as a thing. Like, and people say that God forgives your sin. Well, what exactly is your sin? It's not a thing, right? It's an action maybe that you did.
Right.
It's a thought that you had. And so I don't ever think in terms of sin anymore. For the evangelical, it is everything. I remember Tawana telling me, I was preaching at a church down in Stanford, and she said, you know, John, why are all your sermons about sin? And well, because that's what our struggle is. That's sort of the point, is to get rid of sin. That's stupid. The point is to get rid of sin? The point is always love.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as sin keeps us from love, okay. But it was, and I'm not the first person. Paul the Apostle, it consumed him. Sin just seemed to permeate everything that he wrote. He was always talking about it.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that's Jesus' way at all. Jesus said, sin is complicated. It's complex. And don't do it. Like, love people.
Yeah. Like, not to sound all hippy-dippy, but I think the focus of the way we look at our faith should be more focused out of love for one another, as opposed to what the punishment might be if I don't get it right, or if I don't do this exactly right. Because guess what? You're going to mess up constantly. But don't focus on the messing up. I hear so many times a lot of like evangelical pastors will be like, oh, I'm a sinner, I'm so bad, but God rescue me. And like, they're so focused on what they lack as opposed to what they can give. And like, that's such a way to not love yourself in a healthy way. Like, there's obviously bad ways to love yourself, but there are good ways to love yourself. and constantly focusing on what you lack or what you can't provide or what you can't do takes away from what you could give to the world.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. We did, I was involved in a church that was very involved with messy people. And turned out, when we were involved with messy people, we sinned more often. Because it becomes complicated. And you have things that are so much harder. So here's the trick to not sinning. Don't leave your house.
Don't wake up, don't think.
Don't get out of bed. And a coma.
But then you're being slothful. So then you're falling into the 7 deadly sins, which I believe don't exist anywhere in the Bible.
Well, so, no, they don't. But you can, so I guess the trick would be to do as much good for the world as you could without actually interacting with any people.
Right.
Because as soon as you start interacting with people, it's going to be, your chances for sinning go way up. And so I remember we talked about this, like, man, this is too messy. We need to stop being with all these people. Because this is just, I mean, it's too ripe a ground for sin. Well, and it's what, we do this as parents, right? We try to make sure our kids don't hang out with the other 4-year-old that's going to teach them what sex is. We not that not that actually happened with one of our kids. We tried. We really tried, so we homeschooled, right? It didn't work. They found out all of the stuff. And I just don't think that's God's way, is for us to avoid anything that might compromise us for fear that we might sin. And I think you're exactly right. If there is, you could absolutely not do things out of love for fear of sinning.
Right.
Which would be, in this definition, sin.
So do you think there's still like a punishment or, sort of something that we experience, whether it's here physically on earth or whether it's in, post-life, that reflects the sort of sins or the lack of our ability to maybe meet full love from our time here?
Yeah, I do. I've been wrestling a lot with the afterlife, and I don't know the whole answer to the afterlife. I think that if there is a heaven and hell, then the hell will be sort of like what I talked about. But what I do know is that there's heaven on earth and hell on earth. Mm-hmm. So the thing that kept me from fully embracing that hell wasn't what I thought it was that Jesus talks about hell quite a bit, especially in Matthew. It comes up a number of times, which may say more about Matthew than about Jesus.
I mean, don't talk about me that way, but...
You're Matt. You're not Matthew. And so I was afraid, because I really revere Jesus' words. So I was afraid to sort of do away with hell as I understood it. And I don't know why, but fairly recently, in the last couple years, it finally dawned on me. I'd already been on the track of heaven on earth for a long time. And I don't know why, but it finally dawned on me that there also was hell on earth. Of course there's hell on earth. And I think that sin, anything not out of love or anything that is against love, I think it always produces a part of hell on earth. So whenever you damage somebody, you put them in a hellish position. Whenever you lie to someone, it depends on what kind of lie we're talking about, all of the kinds of things that aren't out of love.
Right.
I think all of those produce small pieces of hell. And if you are in a country where the government has no justice, which has been the case in a lot of countries throughout history, and people are not loving towards each other, I think that is, for me, that is definitionally hell. And so I think that there's always consequences to sin. And often the person that suffers the consequences is the victim and not the perpetrator. So there are always consequences, and it's not fair. Ideally, what happens is, if a victim is suffered, then the perpetrator asks for forgiveness and makes amends. And a right relationship is restored. And it doesn't fix the original, but
Right.
it moves us towards health.
Yeah.
And since all of us are in the position of needing forgiveness from each other, it can be really freeing. My family forgives me routinely, and we try to live that way, where we're always forgiving each other. Some things are harder to forgive than others. We try to always do some kind of penance, not like a punishment penance. Amends is a better word.
Yeah.
Of like, I will try not to do that again. I'll try to do better. That's our phrase. Whenever you go to the dentist and you haven't done everything you're supposed to do this month, so we told our kids, just tell them, I'm so sorry, and I'll do better. Every year. That was the So it can't be that. It's got to be, we really try to do better. We try to live in family. I don't think we have to have sin between people in order to grow as people. But at least in the human experience, it seems to be pretty present, parts of it at least. So often, and we learn to live in grace for each other.
So what do you think about kind of using the definition or kind of like what you were talking about, when you are consistently the victim of someone's sin against you?
Yeah.
At what point is it maybe your responsibility to call that out if they're not recognizing that? Or is moving on from that person completely, like just kind of removing them from your life, is that an option that is not sinful? Or is that sinful because you are no longer giving love to that person?
Yeah, I think it probably is sinful to not move on when it's time to move on.
Okay.
That feels outside of what Jesus did. Jesus didn't seem to ever give up, But having said that, he tells his disciples, hey, we're going to go to this town, and if they don't accept us, we're not going to fight them. We're not going to keep knocking at the door. We are going to shake the dust off our feet and move on. So I think we have at least that example in Jesus. The cross is not that. The cross was, I'm not giving up. I'm going to keep choosing empathy instead of fighting back. But we have that example that I think he was doing for us of the towns of, no, there are times when you're supposed to move on. I don't know when that is, and nobody does.
Right.
It's so complex. It depends on whether they're family. It depends on how hurtful it was. It depends on actually can they change.
Right.
We believe a few rules. Like for us, a rule is if a spouse is physically abused and there's reason to think that this isn't a one-time thing, that it's the spouse's responsibility to leave.
Mm-hmm.
We have really small tolerance for that.
Yeah.
But there are other times where we have a really high tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
They're not somebody that's close to us, and I had a boss at Asbury that I thought was sinning against me all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I constantly felt that from him. And I just decided I was just going to keep forgiving him. I still have bad feelings about him. He's one of only a couple people at Asbury that I have bad feelings about. But he was never sorry. In fact, I feel certain that he was really glad I was gone. And so I wish that I had forgiven better. I hope I can at some point. But while we were in the relationship, I didn't have any choice but to keep forgiving.
Right.
I mean, he was my boss.
Yeah. You're going to see him constantly, so.
Yeah. So all I could do was forgive the best I could. I tried to avoid him as much as possible, walk the other way. I did everything in my power to not be around him. And I even got a boss between that boss and me. I didn't do it, but we got a boss between us, and he saved me.
Yeah.
He saved me. So all that to say, it's really complicated.
Right.
But there are absolutely times when we're supposed to walk away and leave.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect for our own sakes, forgiveness is important. Like, I think I should forgive this guy in a way that I haven't yet, because it's probably bad for me. It probably produces a little bit of hell on earth for me.
Yeah.
I've known people who carry, what is that when you carry anger towards people because they've wronged you? Yeah, I've known people that carry resentment, grudges, just that's the main part of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Is all the ways that people have wronged them. And that's a hell way to live.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying, why live in hell when you could live in heaven? Because a lot of these people are dead. Why would you hold grudges against dead people? There's nothing you can do. It just makes you be in a hell.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, for sure. So I want to go back to the beginning. Original sin. The original basis of Eve eating the apple and causing her and Adam to sin against God. How do you think we should actually view this story? Should we view it as an actual event that actually occurred actually? Or is it some sort of poetic thing from God? And if so, what is it trying to teach us?
Well, so I can set anybody's heart either at ease or at anger to tell you that story did not happen. Mm-hmm. That is not an actual event that occurred. I know. Alex is just like mind blown. Sorry. As we look at the historical record, there's just no place in the timeline for that to have happened. Now there apparently was some point where moral consciousness came into humanity, and it seems to have been at different places in the world at different times.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know when that was or how it happened. All of this is before we have any written words, and maybe even before there was language, so there's that.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we think about this story? Well, for me, I think the point of the story was to tell people to obey their leaders. I think it was a part of the patriarchy of now we are in civilization. We've been in this egalitarian kind of hunter-gatherer society, and now we're in civilization, and we want you to obey us. And let me tell you a story about what will happen if you don't. We are God's representatives. And this is what happened when somebody disobeyed God. So I think a lot of it, for me, it's an anti-story. Having said that, there are parts of it that I think are really true. This is probably way more than you want to know, but or what I thought about it. In the story, the hunter-gatherer idea is the part of the story that God seems to say is good.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Abel's sacrifice as opposed to Cain's sacrifice, which was cultivation, which was of the ground, what he had grown. And the punishment was cultivation. So before we have hunter-gatherers, and then we have cultivation, and that's the punishment. From now on, you are going to get food by the sweat of your brow instead of just being hunter-gatherers. And so I think there are true parts of that mixed in with the other part. But I feel like the point is obedience.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's God's way at all. I don't think God's point is obedience ever. Well, I don't know if ever, but certainly not normally. As for the original sin part, so that was never a Jewish idea. Like if you read through the Hebrew scriptures, what we call the Old Testament, you'll never find the original sin idea. That came about through Paul. He made it up. And I don't know where he got it from. I mean, he probably got it from somebody else too. But it's this idea of sin started with Adam and Eve, and then it was passed down through their genes, is Paul. It's not an Old Testament idea. And so, we've come to believe it's like that's orthodoxy. And it is orthodoxy in terms of New Testament, but it's not an Old Testament idea. I think it is making a binary understanding of something that is complex.
Mm-hmm.
So that, people really have wanted to say, are we born with total depravity and a sin nature? Or are we been born pure and innocent and good? Well, both.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's silly for us to say it has to be one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
We have selfish traits. That's why we have parents, to teach kids how to be good, how to love people. So yeah, there's that in us, but there's also innocence and beauty and purity in a child. And so to make it this binary thing of it's either this or this, I think that was a Pauline idea. And I don't think it's Jesus' way at all.
Mhm.
It's always complicated. Yeah, we have bad stuff in us. And we've got a lot of good stuff too.
Right. I know we're coming close to time, but I want to ask a question kind of along the ideas of, living in a time of heaven and living in a time of, or like creating a heaven on earth and creating a hell on earth. What do you think America is creating?
So I don't want to lose our nonprofit. This is easy to talk about, really. I think that what's happening right now is so cruel and so binary. Our present government has taken things that are extremely complex and made them as binary as possible. And I think that's because we have a leader that thinks only in binary terms and thinks only in zero-sum ideas. Our president believes that if someone does well, then somebody else is doing badly. So in order for America to be first, everybody else has to do worse. And that's the opposite of God's way. God's way is everybody does better. And so I think that we've made a terrible downturn towards hell on earth.
Mm-hmm.
My only hope is that there will be a big enough backlash to propel us forward, even as this was a backlash to, I think, some really good progressive moves that we'd made. I don't know how many people are going to die and be hurt in the meantime. And I'll just say this much. I'm going to talk a lot about this at Beaumont in August, but I think that we are entering that the question of the 21st century is what kind of society is the world going to become in the next 20 years? Will it be utopic or will it be dystopic? I don't mean that in a binary terms it's going to be somewhere between there, but which is it going to be closer to?
Mm-hmm.
Everything is going to change in the next 20 years. From the labor force to how we think, to agriculture, to everything. Technology is moving us forward into a place that we cannot move back from.
Mm-hmm.
And whether we have a government and governments in the world that move us towards heaven on earth or towards hell on earth, and also corporations, I think that is the question of the next 20 years, the question of the 21st century, and I don't know which way it's going to go. But right now, we're not going the right way.
Mm-hmm.
How was that?
Good. I think we'll be able to keep our status. Hopefully.
Great. Okay, we're in.
All right. Well, yeah, I think that's it for today. Thank you all for joining us for the first part of this conversation. If you want to ask us more about sin afterwards, I guess we can discuss that. But yeah, no. So y'all have a wonderful rest of the week, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.